What's up, Duke fans? This is Duke Blue Central coming at you with another Duke basketball podcast, another off-season episode. As you may know, it's been a minute since we've last spoken. The roster's been finalized. Duke has made their final moves in the transfer portal, and K Academy has come and gone. We can really start looking forward to next season and what Duke basketball is going to offer. Good to be talking to you guys again. I miss when I go this long without doing an episode. Love getting a chance to hop on here with all of you listening and just chat about Duke basketball. And that's what we're going to do today. Kind of a fun episode today. So recently I'm contributing to an article one of the friends of the podcast, Duke Wisdom, is writing. If you don't follow him on Twitter, just search up Duke Wisdom. Writes a lot of good stuff, posts a lot of good stuff. But he's doing a kind of a piece on predictions about the next year's Duke squad player rankings, 1 through 15. Several of us are contributing to it. He's going to average all the scores and kind of get like a preseason prediction on who we think is going to be, how the players are going to rank up against each other on next year's squad. So I contributed to that, gave a ranking, thought, hey, this is a good opportunity for me to sit down with you guys and chat about next year's team and where I see all the players fitting in, where I see the most valuable assets to next year's Duke squad. So let's get right into it. Again, this is every player on the team, 1 through 15 ranked. I'm going to go bottom up to leave you in some suspense here. We couldn't just start with number 1. That would be anticlimactic. But like I said, I'm just going to go through this list, give you my thoughts on the preseason rankings, where I think these guys will line up come end of year. This isn't necessarily what I think, where I think they will be to start the year, but I think ultimately this is where they will end the year in their prospective ranking spots. So I'm just going to go 15 to 13, these last 3 spots. Stanley Borden, Neil Begovic, Spencer Hubbard in that order. Those are guys we all are familiar with. Stanley Borden, I put in the 15 spot. No disrespect to Stanley. Of course, all these guys are excellent basketball players. Stanley also has some other amazing talents. If you watch Countdown to Craziness, you'll know all about that. But he's a guy who hasn't really seen the floor in a couple years now. But have to assume he's an awesome guy for the locker room and a great guy to have around the program. Same can be said about Neil Begovic. I put Neil above Stanley because we actually have seen him get some court action in games where Duke has been dominating and Duke has been really successful. So I think Neil belongs in this spot. And then right above him, Spencer Hubbard. Spencer Hubbard's a guy that definitely sees the floor. He sees the floor by far more than the last 2 guys, and has shown some ability to score in the last few minutes of blowout wins. And we know for a fact is an awesome guy to have around the program. Recently got a scholarship last year. Was excited to see that going into last year with all the work he's put into, from coming, practice squad player to being there, putting in the same work as all the other guys do, and not necessarily getting all the shine that the other guys do. Huge respect to the guys that are near the bottom of this list, that are putting in massive amounts of work, and that includes Spencer Hubbard. Happy to have him back in the program next year. I'd keep Spencer as long as he'd be willing to stick around. But everybody always says, man, if this guy was a little bit taller, I think we'd have a problem on our hands. He can handle the ball and can shoot, but love having him on the program. Next up, in spot number 12, this is where I think the list kind of really gets started in most people's minds. I think from like that 9 to 12 spot's really interesting because these are guys that you might predict. Duke rarely has a roster that goes like 9, 10 deep. So in my mind, I'm thinking these 12 through 9 guys are going to be guys that potentially could ride the bench more than they would like to, or more than they're expecting to this next season. And for me, it starts out with Cameron Sheffield, the last transfer that committed to Duke. He is a transfer from Rice. Put up some okay numbers at Rice last year. I think he's maybe had an injury. I can't remember, but put up some. I think he averaged almost 8 points a game for Rice. Seems to be a good kind of like program transfer a transfer from another highly academic school, fits in with the Duke program. Reminds me of like a Patrick Tepe who transferred from Columbia, I believe, or even like a Cale Catchings from Harvard. Reminds me of one of those guys, but I wouldn't be surprised if we see him get some end-of-game minutes for this next season. Number 11, I have the first freshman on the list, and that is Patrick Ngongba. And I think this is an interesting one because I think he is obviously more talented. And what's crazy about this next season's Duke team is there's so much talent that it's going to feel disrespectful to put some of these guys as low as they are. But then when you look at the guys above them on the list, it's like, who do you put where? And I will openly admit, and probably should have said this before I even started running down the list, this is the hardest time I've had with a player ranking. Preseason, during the season, postseason, I think the roster and how good each player is going to be on next year's team is so hard to determine right now. Like I have Patrick Ngongba at 11. And I don't think, if he gets healthy and it's like end of the year, we could be talking about him as like the 6th best player on this next season's team, and nothing would surprise me. So that all being said, just to say that the guys on the lower end of this list absolutely could move up, and I could absolutely be totally wrong about this. But this is just a lot of gut feeling and a lot of things that I've seen and heard about the guys on next year's squad. I think him coming off an injury too does limit him, or at least limit my expectation of how he'll play next season. So Patrick Ngongba coming in at 11. He will and can be a very important player for Duke next season. I think other than him, we've got some dominant kind of forwards and bigs coming that we'll talk about farther up on this list. But he is definitely a guy I think that could give Duke some very important minutes coming off the bench if required. So that could easily shoot him up higher in this list. But moving on to number 10. Number 10, I've got Darren Harris, the shooting guard freshman out of Virginia, Paul IV. Great school, gave us a lot of talent like Jeremy Roach. But I've got Darren Harris at number 10. Harris is probably primarily known for his sharp shooting, drawn a lot of recent comparisons to a lot of the stuff Jared McCain was doing this past season. But hey, listen, it feels horrible putting these guys this low. Darren Harris is going to be a great player. I just think when you look at the guys above him on this list, it's hard for me to see a massive path for him for playing time this season, at least like significant playing time. I do think this next year Jon Scheyer could dip into the bench a lot more than we've seen a Duke team in many, many years. Coach K was notorious for playing 6 or 7 guys, and Scheyer has kind of continued that, but he has shown more willingness to dip into that bench, I think at least a little bit. Now, I still think he's got that Coach K brain in his head where you want your best guys on the court for as many minutes as possible, and they're just going to have to learn to play that long. You're not too worried about rest. But Harris is a special player, and I expect him to be a special player, and I think especially for not this next year, but the year after that, he'll be a very important player for Duke and a great player for Duke. Let's not forget, all of these guys are 5-star freshmen on a lot of sites. I think Harris was teetering between a 4 and a 5 on some sites you look. But he's a kid who can absolutely shoot the lights out, has a dog mentality. Any of the games you watch, he just looks dead serious the entire game, even in like recruiting pictures and stuff. I don't know if I've seen this guy crack a smile, but I'm excited. We need that kind of enemy villain energy at Duke that I think we've been missing for the past couple years, and Harris will bring that in spades. So I'm really looking forward to seeing him on next year's team. And the thing with next year's team is that the guards, other I think than Tyrese Proctor and Caleb Foster, we have a lot of like question marks as to who's going to be the other guys to step up. My rankings will reflect who I think is going to step up, but I just think there's a lot of questions, and all that being said, I think it loans itself to one of these smaller freshmen shooting up the list drastically if they can prove that they can spell Caleb Foster Caleb Foster and Tyrese Proctor some minutes when they're sitting out on the bench, or if they can even play alongside them as a wing player. All of these guys, Darren Harris, Con Knuppel, Isaiah Evans, can really fight for that last spot. But speaking of Con, I have Con up next in the number 9 spot. Con is a very interesting player to watch. He doesn't have like the most athletic builds you would think, but the kid is so smart, intelligent, shoots the lights out of the ball, and is always seems to be making the right pass, making the right play. I do think there will be a physical transition for him into the college game. Now, keep in mind, all these guys are big. Like I tweeted about it earlier in the year. Not one player on this, other than Spencer Hubbard, I don't think anybody on this Duke team is shorter than 6'5", and some of them are even taller than that, and stocky. Plenty of them are stocky. So physicality is going to be something Duke will have in spades of next year, and Con fits that mold exactly. But he's a guy who I don't think we would have to worry about slotting into a 2-guard spot if we needed to fill some time there. I'm excited to see what he can do. I'm really interested. There were times, I think in the Peach Jam, which is an elite high school basketball tournament of this past year, I think Con was like absolutely lighting it up, shooting, I think, over 50% from 3, and that's against like elite high school talent. The thing I'm most interested with him is like, is that 3-point shooting going to translate, and what's he going to look like on the defensive side of the ball? Is he fast enough to keep up with guys, to keep up with smaller guards, and is he physical enough to handle bigger college players that are going to be 4 years older than him? Would be my only questions with Con. But I think in 2 years, we'll really be talking about him as a special, important player. But I think this year there are probably some guys above him that are going to get more playing time and perhaps will be more valuable to this year's team. Don't mean that as an insult to Con, of course. I think he's an awesome guy, awesome player. Next up, number 8 ranking on my list is the transfer from Purdue, the super senior Mason Gillis. I don't think Duke would have went after this guy in the portal had they not had plans to play him perhaps over some of their young freshmen. Number one, there are probably 2 big things you need to know about Mason Gillis. Number 1, he is an absolute star 3-point shooter. He has never shot below 35% from 3 in any of his 4 seasons at Purdue. Last season, he finished shooting 46% on the year from 3. Only averaged about 6.5 points a game, but he had games where he exploded from 3 and could put up double digits in a hurry if you weren't after him. Other thing you need to know, it's kind of 2-in-1, just tough, gritty defense and the ultimate glue guy. That was kind of even a nickname he went by to a lot of the Purdue fans. But he is going to be, I think, a key member of the locker room next season and a leader on this team. It wouldn't even surprise me if he's named a captain, as crazy as that sounds. He is an older guy, but just coming into Duke and immediately being a captain maybe could be a strange thing, but it would not surprise me if we're looking at Mason Gillis being one of the captains of this Blue Devil squad. Everything you hear about him is how much of a lead-by-example guy he is, the ultimate hard worker, gritty defender, doesn't give up an inch, very physical, and a guy who was coming from an elite program who just lost in the national championship game. It's worth mentioning he plays the forward position, is 6'6", 225, physical player, but he can also switch, which is something, if you're looking at this team, a lot of these guys have in common. All of these guys, all the transfers we got, pretty much all the freshmen we have, all the returners we have, are able to switch and guard at least 1 through 4. Some of them are able to guard full 1 through 5 rotations. And Gillis is no exception to that rule. I think it's obvious to see Shire is really honing in on defense this next season, as crazy as that sounds. I think this Duke team has the potential to be not a good defensive team, but a great and I think the best defensive team in the country if all things can come together and they can learn how to attack the basketball well. And with guys with a lot of experience like Gillis, I think that'll come together quicker than it would in previous years. And I just think he's going to get more playing time than some of these other dudes. I don't think he would have transferred to Duke knowing he was just going to sit behind a lot of freshmen. So I've got him at number 8. Number 7, I've got Isaiah Evans, one of the more exciting, maybe polarizing freshmen coming in. I hear a lot of opinions on Isaiah for some reason. I think he's an excellent player, an absolute baller. He is bucket, as they say. Can score at will, can score in isolation, can shoot really well. His build will remind you a lot of Brandon Ingram, real skinny, real slim, but he embraces that mindset of being just a scrappy player. And man, you want to talk about a guy that plays with energy. If you want to see an energetic basketball player, just go type in Isaiah Evans high school basketball highlights. I promise you, if you're not familiar with his game now, he will absolutely be a menace in college basketball next season if he gets the proper playing time, or the season after that, whatever. He will be a great Duke villain. People will hate him. He will maybe be the most hated player on this team if he gets enough minutes, because he plays with energy. He talks a lot of smack, and he backs it up with the way he plays. He plays with energy. I'm just so excited to see this guy in a Duke jersey. It's gonna be something to see him play with a lot of the guys we have on next year's team. Last year's team, it got a lot of flack for being not tough or no grit or whatever, which I don't really agree with. It was a tough team. We beat Houston, who was like the toughest team in the country in the NCAA tournament, and we out-toughed them. But man, we kept all of the tough guys from last season. I would say most people say, just watch Tyrese Proctor play. He was the guy who kind of maybe talked smack the most, and you could see just was trying to outwill his opponents out there. Kept him around and added some absolute dogs around him. But anyway, moving on to number 6. Now, I think I have this guy probably higher than most people do. But my number 6 spot, I have Sion James. I almost said Sion, which is a callback to another famous Duke player you might have heard of. But it's Sion James, our transfer from Tulane. Was a junior this past season, will be a senior when he comes to Duke. I have Sion as the 6th best player on this Duke roster, and I know that seems huge, but there's something about this kid that I just have a belief he is going to be special at Duke. Coming off a season where he averaged 14 points, 5 rebounds, almost 3 assists, while shooting 51%, and he played point guard. He was not a forward. To give you an idea, Mason Gillis averaged 47%. On the season last year as a power forward. Sion is averaging 51% as a guard, point guard, the leader of his team. And that says something, because it's actually, if you look at the stats, Sion James and Mason Gillis are interesting, because Mason is playing power forward and takes almost all of his shots from the outside. Sion is a point guard and takes a huge percentage of his shots from inside the paint and even inside the key. This is a guy who gets to the basket and is so strong. By the way, as I mentioned, nobody on this team is under 6'5". Sion is 6'6", 220 as a point guard. Just to give reminder here, Mason Gillis is 6'6", the same height, 225, only 5 pounds heavier than Sion, who is going to be a point guard or a shooting guard on next year's Duke team. He is a massive guard. Plays super physical. Go watch his highlights. He just always seems to be making the right decision. He's an excellent passer. Something I've read about him is his character is really high, and every year he's been at Tulane, he has done what he's asked and gotten better. The one knock on his game going into his senior season was that he couldn't shoot the outside shot, the 3-ball, very well. His first 3 years at Tulane, he shot 28% his freshman year, 33% his sophomore year, 31% his junior year, and shot all the way up to 38% from 3 his junior year at Tulane. Yeah, or I guess maybe senior or super senior. I don't know. I don't know how the years count anymore. But but his last season, this past season, he shot 38% from 3, which was the one thing people thought were holding him back from really being an elite player. And he worked on it, and he got better at it, which is something that is scary to see in a player of his size, speed, strength, agility. I think Sion could absolutely be special on this next year's team. And another reason I think is just from positional need. I think Duke needed more guards on this team. I think everybody knows Tyrese Proctor and Caleb Foster are going to be the lead guards on next year, but it would absolutely not surprise me if by the end of the season we're talking about Sion being in the starting lineup. I just have a belief that this guy will be special. I don't know. Maybe it's just the tape I watch and he hustles so much. He's amazing defensively. When I tell you, if we have a backcourt of Tyrese Proctor and Sion James, those two, and Caleb Foster's no slouch on defense, by the way, but those two guys as a point guard and shooting guard with a couple of the other guys we're going to talk about, the defensive potential of this team is insane. One thing Sion thrives on is stealing the ball. He averages over a steal a game. It's just led his team in steals. I think he was like an all, or he might have been. He was probably an all defensive team in whatever conference Tulane is in. But amazing at just hunting the ball. And man, with those two guards up top, it is going to be difficult sledding to get the ball past those two guys. And hey, if you do, we're only going to have one of the best defensive front courts in the country as well. So I'm super pumped for Sion. I just have an unwavering belief that he's going to be really good. All right, moving on. I've talked enough about him. He might be subtly the player I'm most excited about next season, which I know is insane, thinking about the guys we have coming up, especially the guy at number 1. But next up, number 5 in the ranking is Malik Brown, the transfer from Syracuse. This is a guy who just does everything. Like I almost don't have a lot to say about him because he just does everything so well. Is an elite rebounder of the ball, and I would call elite defensively. First team All-ACC last season. He played his best game of the year last season was at Cameron against Duke, where he scored way more than any other Syracuse player and was far more effective against us. Which is a good strategy. Guy balls out against you, look for that guy in the transfer portal if he's in it. But he's 6'8", 200-something pounds. He brings a lot of size to this Duke team. I think there's a world in which he absolutely starts. I think the plan potentially is to have Cooper Flagg play the 3 instead of the 4. So I think there's definitely a world where Malik Brown is the 4 to Cooper Flagg's 3 rather than subbing in for Cooper at the 4. I'm really excited about Malik Brown. I think he knows his role. I think it was a perfect transfer fit. I think he knows what he does well and is going to bring that in spades to this next year's Duke team. And again, we talk about toughness, grittiness. Can't find a player tougher than him. He started every game of the season after the Duke game. He actually didn't start all the Syracuse games before that. After that Duke game, he exploded. He started every game after that and was excellent ever since. The one thing I think you got to look out for him is his fouls. He did have a little bit of a propensity to foul in games. Got to keep that down, but that's not something I'm too worried about. That's something you can work on with the player. We talked about that with Filipowski a lot this past season, and he was able to get that under control. Coaching staff will work with him on that, but Malik's just going to be an awesome player for us. I'm viewing him in my mind as the Mark Mitchell replacement, but I think right now Malik Brown is probably, well, it's close, but I think he's probably he's a more experienced, I think, I think he has the same experience as Mark, but I think he will bring more to next year's team than Mark would have. I think Mark was looking for a larger scoring role on a team. I think Malik is not that concerned with his scoring totals. He's a guy who mainly scores on putback dunks and open layups and things like that, and he's fine with that. And that's what this Duke team needs next year, and a guy who's going to be elite defensively, which he is. Next up, number 4, we have a big transfer, Kamen Malawach. I'm going to butcher his name every time I say it, but that may just how it's going to be until I get used to saying it. But obviously, this is a freshman that we all should be very excited for. He ranked about probably aggregate number 3 recruit in the nation on most sites. It was kind of weird because some sites don't have him on there because he's an international transfer from the NBA Africa Academy. I think he's like his weight and height kind of vary based on what website and what timing you're looking at, but he's 7'2", at 200 and something pounds, whatever you want to make of that. And he will get bigger by the time he is at Duke and gets in the weight room there. But he is one of those special players you might could call a unicorn. Defensively, he does what you think he does as a 7-2 player. He's a huge presence in the post, and he really goes after block shots. I think that Duke fans will see a little bit of Mark Williams in this guy. I do think we'll have to be patient with him. He only started playing basketball at all a few years ago, which is extremely strange for a player of his level. But there's a crazy story of him like being spotted by an NBA scout in Africa that everybody should read. But it's a really inspiring thing, his life path and the journey that he's on. And I'm so excited that the next step in that journey is in Durham. But as a defensive prospect, it's hard to find a defensive prospect with a higher ceiling than Common. 7'2", longer wingspan than that, I think. Blocks everything in sight. I think if there's anything you got to worry about with his defensive game, he does go after every blocked shot, sometimes leaving him open to like back or cutting passes behind him or things like that. But I'm really not worried about it. I think once he gets that minor part of his game under control, he'll be a menace defensively. Offensively is where there are some exciting things here. He's shown an ability to hit the outside shot with some consistency. He's not just a guy that's going to back you down in the post. He will take you to the three-point line and dribble with you. And it is a sight to behold. Go watch up YouTube highlights of him playing. And keep in mind, too, when he's playing against NBA, Africa, or African League teams who are naturally have a lot more size than college and even some professional teams. The African League he plays in has a lot of size. So, don't be surprised when he comes to college and looks even bigger than he does now with his professional team. But he's a guy to be really, really excited about. A guy that I think is definitely going to start for next year's team, if not immediately, then by the middle and end of the year. And I think he will be one of Duke's most important players at the end of the season. He is our center. He's our one really big man that we can rely on on a defense perspective. He'll be a massive lob threat for guys like Tyrese Proctor and even to Cooper Flagg. A lot to be excited about with Common, and I think he has an extremely high ceiling. He's projected to be the number 3 pick in the NBA draft next season. So, that tells you all you need to know about Common. All right, next up on our list, number 3 is Caleb Foster, one of the only freshmen returning from last year's team. We're all excited to have Caleb Foster back, especially after an injury occurred to him where he wouldn't be able to finish out last season's tournament run, wasn't able to play in the ACC or NCAA tournament at all. Who knows what happens if Duke has him on last year's team. I think we really could have used him in that NC State game we lost in. But alas, we got him back this next season. And I think, we've talked about him a lot because he was a player on last year's team. I'm excited to see his sophomore jump, and I think he will take one. He was a great three-point shooter for us last season. I think finished at 37% or above even. He might have even shot 39 to 40% from three. I don't have the stat sheet right in front of me. But we know he's good at that, and I think he'll really step up his game from a playmaking and from a driving perspective. I loved his drives to the baskets and how they looked last season. I think there were times he could maybe get lost on the court out there, but I think next season the experience he'll have, and I think the role that he is slated to play, will see him have the ball in his hands more and see him with more opportunities to score, which I think he'll take advantage of. We saw him step up in clutch moments. I think of playing in Madison Square Garden at the beginning of the year against Michigan State, which was a highly ranked matchup at that point in time, and he stepped up and really carried Duke to a win, even with all the talent we had on last year's team. So I think Caleb will have a great season next season. I'm excited to see where he can take his sophomore year. I think he's a guy who will be eyeing the NBA after this season, or at least maybe anticipating that. And to do that, he's got to step up his numbers and step up his role on next year's team. And I think he'll do that. I think he's one of the two-headed, he's one of the two-headed dragon that is our backcourt with him and Tyrese. And they're going to have really high expectations on them to lead a team that is massively talent rich, and I think he'll be up to the task. That leads me to number 2, Tyrese Proctor, a captain on last season's team, junior Tyrese Proctor. And man, after his freshman tournament year run, a lot of people, when Duke was eliminated in the second round, a lot of people think he was gone then. I think nobody expected us to be talking about a junior year Tyrese. But here we are. We've got Proctor back for another season, and the guard spot, if it wasn't all his last year, it is all his this year. This is his team to run from a ball handling perspective, and I think this is the team that is the most suited to Tyrese's true talents, which is as a playmaker. As much as we've seen this kid score at will at times and be a great shooter, I think his biggest strength is his passing ability and his playmaking ability and his ability to run a pick-and-roll offense. And what better players to run a pick-and-roll offense than Malawach and Cooper Flagg? These are probably the 2 players you would pick if you had your pick of any players in the country to run a pick-and-roll offense with. And I think Duke's screens and rolls and cuts will be a critical part of our offense next season, and there's no better guy to run it than Tyrese Proctor. He's an awesome passer. We know that already, and I think he will, again, have opportunities to score next season, but honestly, it wouldn't surprise me if his scoring numbers stayed the same as this past season, just with how much other scoring I think we'll have. There are a lot of guys on this list that their first option is to score. I think Tyrese's first option is to be a passer and a kind of a setup guy for his teammates, which is amazing. And also, we always talk about experience, how much that matters come tournament time. It doesn't feel that long, but Tyrese is a junior now, and he's going to have a sophomore and a graduate transfer in Sion James with him. Makes for quite an experienced backcourt when it comes to March time, and we know how important that is when you just look at the teams that have won this past time. I expect Tyrese to be even better than he was last year. I think he improved this past season, despite what some crazy people will tell you. He was better on almost every metric. Defensively, he's a monster, and I think he will lead the strongest defensive backcourt potentially in the country with him, Sion, and Caleb Foster, and maybe the best defensive team in general at all in the country. And excited to see Tyrese. I expect him to be a captain. I think he will be the primary on-the-court leader for this next year Blue Devil team. And that gives us to number 1, maybe not surprising to anybody listening to this. Number 1 player preseason for me is Cooper Flagg. Now, as nervous as potentially it makes me to put a incoming freshman as what I think is going to be the best player on a top 10 to top 5 to top 2 and not 2 team, this is not an ordinary freshman. This is not a number 1 recruit in last year or the year before's class. They were kind of weaker classes because of COVID, kind of stomped out a year of experience. Cooper Flagg is not that. He is, he's a Zion. He's a Paolo. He's a Marvin Bagley. He's a Jason Tatum. He is that level of recruit where he steps in and will potentially be the favorite to win the Wooden Player of the Year award. I'll predict he'll be in the top 3. I would even think the top 2 betting favorites to win the National Player of the Year award next year, just like Zion did a few years ago as a freshman in runaway fashion, by the way. I think Cooper Flagg will have those expectations. Little to know about his game if you haven't heard yet. He's an excellent defender, makes all the right plays, makes all the right passes, doesn't have to score first, is maybe the best blocking prospect at his size ever in high school. I mean, you've got scouts saying things like they've never seen a player play defense in high school the way he does. So I don't know what more I can say about him. If there's a knock about him, I guess it's his outside shot, which looks a little funky, but it goes in. But man, this is a kid that is expected to be generational, not just in high school, not just in college, but even in the NBA. He has size, he has speed, he has athleticism, he can jump. A lot of his points are dunks and drives to the lane. He will be a guy who can drive into the lane and get contact. I think he'll lead the team in scoring next season, and I think he'll do it in a variety of ways. I personally don't think he'll necessarily be like as loud of a scorer as, let's say, a Zion was, since we're talking about him. I think he could be more of a quiet scorer where it doesn't necessarily feel like he's putting the ball in the basket a lot, but then you look up at the end of the game and he's got 24 points on like 50% shooting. That's what kind of his stats have been at Montverde, which is where he came from. National champions, by the way, undefeated season, the best high school program in recent years. And he was the leader and the best player on that team. So if that tells you anything, but I expect him to be the best player on Duke next year, and I expect him to be near the best player in college basketball next season. I know the past few years, freshmen have got a really bad rap. Again, I think a huge part of that is because of COVID taking away a year of playing from a lot of these guys. This class is going to be the first one in a minute that has not had that massively affect their high school basketball careers. And I think it will immediately be evident that this year's freshman number one is different than the past few seasons' number one recruit. I think, Duke had the number one freshman recruiting class last season. A lot of people use that against us. To say, why weren't we performing better even though we made an Elite Eight run? We're going to remind people how good incoming freshmen can be this next season. This is one of Duke's strongest recruiting classes ever, I think. If Cooper Flagg pans out to be the player we think he will be, it might be Duke's best class ever. So yeah, that I don't know what else I can say about Cooper. Generational player all around, and not just in college, and it's not just me saying that. but yeah, so that concludes my rankings. Thank you guys for listening. Glad you're sticking around with us. Can't wait to bring you more off-season content, off-season episodes. If you want to leave the show out, leave a rating wherever you're listening, or give me a follow over at Duke Blue Central over on Twitter. Good talking to you all. Be back with you soon. Go Blue Devils.